All right, welcome everybody. Let me call to order the Monday, December 2nd, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Can we take the roll?
Mr. Wadiska?
Here.
Mr. Rankin?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
Here.
Ms. Weiss?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
All right, we're all here. Can I get a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All right, all those in favor? Aye. All right, it's unanimous, I can tell. Any petitions for items not on the agenda?
No.
Okay, well then let's move right into Mr. Wilburn and the Railroad College presentation. Thank you for coming and joining us for the speaker series.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and Paul, who had to run home just now, but family first. I'll keep this very brief. Paul asked that I sort of bring you the state of the affairs for Railroad Cottages, and I will be brief and leave it open for questions at the end. Ms. Basemore is going to help me at one point because we're going to switch, and there is a brief video, about 3 minutes, that the Community Association Institute did when they came and interviewed a bunch of the purchasers of the cottages, so you can hear directly from them. Don't have to just be me. So my goal is to just, you all are very familiar with the history of the cottages, rehash on some of the community planning issues are by right and proposed and how that's worked out, a brief review of where we are and what the residents are saying. So, it's like magic. So as you all remember, this was very much an idea that was brought by Teresa Twyford first to the city about, inspired by Ross Chapin's book on pocket neighborhoods. She had the good fortune, misfortune of meeting me at one point and realized that I had done a co-housing community here in Virginia, which is about half of the pocket communities that Ross talks about are co-housing communities. So they're intentional communities, places where people are trying to make a neighborhood, trying to make a community. So the ordinance was then developed as something that would take that notion and then apply it more specifically to Falls Church. So as you're aware, it's age restricted. It means to have coordinated site design, significant community amenities, some sort of LEED or good measurable sustainable quotient, 1.5 stories, low, 1,000 square feet, porches, substantial landscape buffers. So from a planning perspective, the issues and benefits, since the ordinance has been passed, there's been just a tremendous outpouring on the various missing pieces of housing in this area. And you were a step or two ahead. The middle housing, or what they call attainable housing, the ULI, and it talks about cottages as one of the best ways to find a middle between the average big house and a condo. So something in between, because it just doesn't really exist in the marketplace. It used to in Pemmon Hills, but people are tearing those down right and left. The ordinance was also specifically addressed for aging in community, and I like to say that that's also a missing middle, because there's a missing middle between what people say they want to do, which is aging alone, solo and in place in their house, and they have a lot of science that says that's a really bad thing for you. That's going to be probably dying earlier and not as happy as being around your community. So the other choice that's been proposed is essentially what I call the Love Boat. It's these big sort of 400 unit projects that are not as personal as your house, but they have all these amenities. So this kind of pocket community that's age focused allows people to have a community of neighbors that care about them, not care for them, but care about them. So it's another variation of the missing middle. So that connectedness and community are central to the Railroad Cottages. It was built into the ordinance and needed to be in proximity to a walkable part of the city, which it is. It's also meant to promote community interaction within the people who are living this community. So it's built around that. That was a big part of what our firm brought from our co-housing experience of how to make that happen. The last piece, which was a big part of what we were trying to do to meet the market, but it's inherent in the ordinance, was to make sure that this was earthcraft and universal design. And so we actually provided documentation, a lot of testing. The building department, Doug really held our feet to the fire. We had a lot of inspections for exactly those things. It was also a market necessity. So there was a lot of back and forth about this by right, how to compare the two things. So at the time, we did a whole series of slides showing upper left what the proposed cottage community would do to an existing residence, what a by right neighbor could do, and then the overlay too. It's pretty dramatic. And when you go out there now, you can see just how exactly pulled back we are from all the neighbors. So we did a whole series of community benefits to the proposed versus by right. Traffic actually showed that it was virtually the same, that the age-restricted housing came up to almost exactly as for single family. The density, which is very much built into the ordinance in terms of mass and volume, means that we were at or less. Stormwater management landscaping, I think, is one of the things that is inherently hugely different between by right versus this project. We were a consolidated development. We were held to a much higher standard than a single-family detached ever would. In this case, especially because the site, when we first came online, did not appear to have a outfall to a storm system. So we were going to have to detain and treat 100% of the water such that we did not have any net effect to the neighbors at all, because we had no overland, well, we had overland relief, but that's the point. We didn't want to do that. During construction, there was actually a pipe leading out to the other street discovered in one of the neighbors' yards with a collapsed intake that we were eventually able to get permission from that neighbor, even though they were in the middle of selling their house, to actually connect our project, which allowed us to take up our entire outfall on site, but then take the uphill neighbors on Railroad and put them into our system and out the pipe so that you wouldn't have the ponding in normal events that you would normally have. Would never have happened with a single-family house. It was also a function of the buffers that were required by this ordinance are significantly more than you would ever have as a single family. You might plant some trees, you might have to do some of the normal Chesapeake Bay Act, but you don't get a 20-foot wide, continuous 400-foot buffer with evergreen as well as deciduous. Sound and light pollution. Again, we were under the scrutiny of an ordinance. All the lighting is dark sky compliant. In our case, as part of our environmental outreach, we picked using geothermal heat pumps. So in fact, we have no visible or audible HVAC systems. You don't have the big whirring heat pumps outside. So we ended up being much less of a nuisance than any possible house would be. Sustainability, again, with the ordinance requiring it, we picked up Earthcraft Gold. What was interesting to us is that a lot of the potential purchasers really found that to almost be table stakes now. That for you needed to have a demonstrated commitment to having green and sustainable because they wanted really low energy bills and they wanted to be able to define that for the future. So it was an interesting overlay that we found from the market for senior. Fiscal impact, that was something that we'll find out. Just to reiterate, I'm sure you all know the site. It's a triangle. It's probably the hardest to develop site in the city in terms of geometry. We were able to use that to our benefit. The right-hand side is essentially undevelopable, so we've left that green, which is at least 40, 100 some odd feet of just green. We have all the buffer across the bottom to the backs of the existing neighbors on the next street, and we're able to use the fence and carport to buffer activity and houses away from the most immediately affected neighbor. So we did a whole series of drawings. One of the things you may or may not have picked up at the time is that these homes are built to create a sense of connection to the community, so that the activity side, the kitchen, is actually forward and there's a front porch. At the same time, there's a privacy of a back patio and a back area so that you can be part of the neighborhood when you want. You close drapes, move another part of the house, both inside and outside, to maintain that privacy. So we had all these nice, cute drawings. They looked really cute because, you know, we're the architects, we make them cute. But I think we did a pretty good job of seeing it all the way through. That's the exact model to that house. And four-sided architecture. So the attention to detail was important to us from a market perspective because you're going to have these homes really fairly close together. And so everybody's looking into each other's houses. So you want to have four-sided. There wasn't going to be a brick facade with three sides of vinyl. That wasn't going to work. So the amenities. We probably went too far with this. This is probably a result of my co-housing background. We really pushed the model of having a full common house that was big enough for every single person in the community to get together for events. Common meals, their own meetings, different activities, and we also gave them all a separate guest bedroom in that building. I live in a co-housing community, and we do not have a guest quarters in our common house because basically in 19 houses, there's always 3 or 4 extra bedrooms for Cousin Vinny, you know, to come and stay with you. And we do that on a pretty regular basis. Probably something we could have done without. I'll be interested to see how they use it over the next few years. We have a solar array on the airport. We have extremely low maintenance, and it's actually designed now as a condominium because that allowed us to have all the exterior skin be the maintenance responsibility of no one individual, but to be of the condominium itself. That was seen as a real benefit. We played with different ideas, talked to different entities about the pros and cons, and it turned out the market really said, no, we like that idea. We want it to be a collective for that kind of work. We talked about the other things, the residential sprinklers, and then they've already started using this the common house pretty robustly. They're having a lot of happy hours, which I think is a great interpretation of having meals together. Can you go ahead and play that video? It's about 3 minutes. The Condominium Association Institute did this video interview. Go ahead. Can you hit the full? Yeah, perfect.
Considered the first pocket neighborhood in Northern Virginia, the Railroad Cottages and Falls Church showcase a trend of smaller developments in urban areas that enhance walkability and foster a sense of community.
And we looked at the houses and realized that for us this was going to be a great opportunity. It had the access of the bike path. It's very walkable, which for us is a big deal. We kind of like that, what I'll call almost European lifestyle. You walk to what you want to go to.
Located alongside the Washington and Old Dominion Trail, the community consists of 10 cottage-style single-family homes and a shared common house, all designed to be energy efficient and reduce environmental impacts.
I love how well built everything is, and I love that it has a small footprint, environmental footprint. I'm paying, like, just for my utilities, I'm paying like less than half of what I did before.
It had a lot of appeal because it had 4 walls separate from and apart from the other 4 walls of the condominium. It didn't have elevators. And then we liked the concept of the house, the smaller house, having a house as opposed to a condominium.
The houses are connected by a boardwalk to encourage neighbors to interact with each other, but are also designed so that residents can have privacy.
So the physical structure has to promote that which people are most often looking for when they're buying a house. Yes, they're buying a house, but they're also buying a community. You can say that's because you're picking schools or walkability, or does the neighborhood feel good to you? It's hard to assess if you like the neighbors because you don't live there yet. But what we're trying to do is design something that helps promote balanced community interaction.
Residents say that community interaction was an unexpected perk of the downsized, low-maintenance lifestyle at Railroad Cottages.
I liked the idea of knowing my neighbors. I lived in a neighborhood for 25, 30 years. And although initially I knew my neighbors pretty well, then they all moved out, and then the neighborhood changed, and then you just don't know your neighbors anymore.
What's unusual is I know all my neighbors here fairly well and get along with them fairly well. I'd say real well.
Yeah.
But in our old house, there were parts of our neighborhood where I've never met my neighbors in 15 years. So it was initially somewhat of a transition. The community aspect, really, I didn't consider until we moved in, to be honest with you. You know, it's surprising to see your neighbors on a regular basis.
I did not pay them to say any of that. It was really, I'll tell you, as an architect designing in this kind of world, it was really amazing to have them say a lot of those things, just unstudied, to come out and say that they were realizing how much they were going to value being part of a neighborhood and having a community and being connected. Now, since this interview, what they did is they actually went around to every single contiguous neighbor around the entire cottages with a flyer, didn't just leave it, they knocked until they found somebody that was there, invited them all over for a social at the Railroad Cottages, which I think is huge because that needed to have some healing. And they were almost uniformly given really positive feedback that they were being so outwardly seeking other neighborhoods and trying to connect. One of the buried comments in there is how it's designed to minimize impact and develop sustainability. One of the things that people don't realize is that you can put out a little email and have somebody give you a ride to the airport, or if somebody else is going to the grocery store, they pick something up. You already see that if you have a strong community like that, you can have a certain drop in travel and use, and you don't have, if somebody's got a tool, you can borrow it, you don't have to buy it, for instance. That's a big benefit. If you go, last one. Got one more slide. Oh, I can do that, can't I? There you go. So my takeaway in cottages, it's a missing middle in two ways. It's not just a traditional cost size type of house, but it's also, as an age-restricted community, filling a missing middle in terms of aging options for people in this area. There are some planning issues that I think are, if we had not age-restricted, these units would have sold 5 times over. It was amazing how many people were really interested in small cottage communities. And part of that was because you could just walk by it. I will tell you, almost all the residents are thrilled to be in Falls Church. They almost all are saying, I can walk to the library, I can walk to the community center, I can walk to these things, and they're using them. The downsizing was really much harder for them than they expected. And part of that was driven because of the mandate in the code for having no basement, which I'll tell you actually ended up costing us more money than putting a basement in, because some of the devices we had to put in to make sure that it was waterproof and damp proof, even though we were putting air conditioning and heating through it. I'm not sure that that was really the best use of that time and energy. The sprinklers, I think that really came out of this specific location. I don't know that's something that you would normally see in other locations. The extent of amenities and green initiatives, I think you should probably think that we went a little far. both, as I said, for like the common house amenity, it could probably have been reduced. I think some of the green elements that we did were above and beyond. I don't know that a normal developer going in could have been able to do that. The three takeaways I get from the residents were that this sense of community connection was really unexpected, which is really thrilling to me, kind of sad at the same time, is that I had an instructor who used to say, I have clients who come in and they ask for a candied apple, but take out the stick, take off the nuts, and get rid of the caramel sauce. I said, well, you should just ask for an apple. He says, if they've never had an apple, they don't know how to ask for it. And so I don't know that in our time right now, people know how to ask for community. And that's frustrating because I think it's better than average. This is not something people have to down-turn or think it's a secondary solution. It's a better than average solution for most people. That's it for me. If you all have any questions, follow up.
Thank you very much. I have several questions, but let me turn it over to the other commissioners to see what they have to ask you. But I appreciate your time, really. That was very helpful. Anybody have any questions?
Just 'cause you mentioned it. I mean, you mentioned the basement. So is that in our ordinance that says you can't have a basement in these things? Is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
And so, and the reason why you said it was practically there were some difficulties to implementing that. What do you mean by that?
You're not going to go, we wanted a crawl space for a variety of reasons. Given the low access to the site, we wanted to have, we didn't want to do slab on grades. That could have been a nightmare. At the same time, it allowed us to do some of the air conditioned heating under it to be very efficient. But it means that you don't have anybody ever going down there. So you have to be sort of extra paranoid about water. If somebody goes down into a basement, they're going to see water. They're going to see an issue much quicker than a crawl space, which you can never get access to. So we went and used, I call it the squishy dinosaurs. It's a super heavy duty plastic that is much thicker than you would ever see. It's bright blue. In order to make that as waterproof as possible, we put in an entire humidifier, dehumidifier to make sure there was never kind of any issue. They all have sumps with alarms and all that sort of thing. But it was one, you're halfway, in this area, you dig down partly for a crawl space, you're about 10 cents more, you get a basement out of it. I think there could have been ways to control, which I think was a concern, is to make sure that that did not become habitable space.
Right.
I think if you said no plumbing will be run into there, so it can never become a bathroom. It's also not a habitable space if you make it 7 feet, but it's still useful. So people could go down there and store a lot of things. And that's what they really were finding, is that they were having to downsize. We did give them some attic access components to it, but it's not quite the same.
Are all the houses occupied now?
Yes.
And are the neighbors who were not excited about this going in, have any of them commented now that it's all built?
Not to me. But from the way the neighbors are talking about it, they're working very diligently to make that a connection that's good and healthy and beneficial to everybody. I think, you know, the last hoorah, I will tell you that actually the city sponsored and the Smart Growth Coalition had a big
Coalition
tour.
for Smarter Growth.
Coalition, I always just say Stewart, but had a big house tour, and that was still a stressful, you know, condition, because you can't control the public. If somebody comes up and just drives and parks anywhere, it's instantaneous on that street. Any other normal street, you'd have parking on both sides. It would be a normal on-street parking condition. And I think that the neighbors have all understood that they have one car, and they're embracing that in terms of trying to keep their vehicles down.
I saw in the presentation, there was an estimate that it would be about 55 trips per day. Has there actually been a count to see how many trips have
We haven't gone
occurred?
back in because what we haven't been able to do, I believe they just put in the grass pave extension on the side of the street, but I'll tell you that widening of that street has already improved everybody's life on that, the half a dozen houses that are on there. Because it's a safer environment, people can pull off and let somebody else come through. But in talking to the neighbors, I have no empirical mathematical evidence, but they never seem to have any problem. They've never talked about having two cars making it at the same time and blocking each other.
I have
Yep.
two questions. One is just wondering if you know how the neighborhood did in the 100-year storm this summer.
They actually did pretty well. There had been some added, the city had said we needed to do some adjustment to a couple of the rain gardens. And as far as I know, they were as well as could be expected. None of the houses at all had any kind of issues in the cottages. And as far as I understand, the two houses that have traditionally always been very affected in behind us had significantly less ponding, significantly less water.
That's great. My second question is just on the green initiatives, your comment. I'm just wondering if you can unpack the comment. I think we said it was above and beyond, and maybe what other developers might not do. And, we have a 24 vision to be a leader in environmental
Yes.
sustainability, so it sounds like we're doing this. And I'm just wondering if you could say
Well,
a
we
little bit
jumped,
more.
we went to Earthcraft Gold, so we jumped a whole level ahead of the requirements from the city. And we put in a shelter in place for the community by putting in the common house, which we originally thought we were going to be able to do with batteries and do the solar array. As it turns out, it's a little bit of a bait and switch still for a lot of manufacturers. You can't get the batteries at any kind of cost effective. You go on the Tesla site and it says it's like $5,000 a battery, except you can't get them. So when we said it was $50,000 a battery, we said, wow, I can put in a generator and make this a shelter in space a lot easier. So we put the whole carport up and to do a very robust solar array, and it turned out there was no benefit, there's no way to store it, and there was no way to distribute it to all the houses, partly because Virginia rules are a little different. In a year, we may have a different policy, and that would go a long ways to adding that. I think the geothermal is something you're not going to see very commonly. That's a very expensive detail. I think it's hugely beneficial to the cottages because it does give you outdoor space that is fairly not huge. You're not sitting on a half acre, and yet you don't have any sound problems. In fact, when I was in there, they were talking about who was the loud barking dogs and who had the loud AC, and it was one of the neighbors, the existing neighbors, old system. It was kind of grinding and whining, and they were wondering who that was because for them it's quiet as a bug.
Any other questions? Well, a lot of the questions I had were asked already. But in terms of, and you mentioned a little bit with the basements, but are there any other lessons learned that you think that we could, as we're going to have to update this ordinance, that we could take away from this project? Specifically in terms of how we would structure the ordinance and what changes we would make. If maybe the basement is one, maybe.
I think the basement, I think the automatic requirement for sprinklers, I don't think that's something that would be normal if it was a city street anywhere else. Railroad Avenue had some real challenges. Even though we helped and solved it, I think all three fire departments that serve Railroad all had anxieties over that street. So I don't think the sprinklers are something that's really hugely beneficial.
The issue was the access to the
Yes.
to the cottages, so they wanted to build in some time before they had to respond, or
Correct.
or it might,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was something a little too specific. I think you all got a lot of it very correct in terms of focusing on not just the pocket community in terms of its physical, but saying what its goals are. And I think that's a good thing to try to promote, not without a huge amount of detail, which is good too, but the idea to promote community within the residents, I think is a fairly key feature to maintain. I think it's going to be one of those things you'll know it when you see it, but it still relies, you put the vessel out, the people still have to create their own institution to take advantage of it. But if it was, for instance, if you didn't have some closure, if it was just a single line, for instance, it wouldn't create that sense of space. We were able to do it on one of the most challenged lots in the city and still create that nest and sense of community for the residents. I think that's something critical to keep.
I agree. You say here on this slide that they're thrilled to be part of Falls Church. I don't know if you know exactly where everybody came from, but did you see people coming mostly outside of the city, or these were people who had larger houses within the city and wanted to stay in
I
it?
think there's one gal who moved within the city, for sure, because I know her. I think you had a lot of people who had family in the area, and they were moving here to be closer to family, either in the city or immediately adjacent. And this was, from what they could tell, this was the only game in town that got the right blend in terms of size and location, and had, they all, I tried to teach them, it's called the Little City of Falls Church, but I think they really are appreciating that, and they are looking forward to participating in all the active parts of the city.
Yeah, well, it must be very rewarding to see your vision about this and how you wanted to create a community and see it come to fruition. And I think that the insight that community is beneficial to people, while not new, I do agree with you, it's underplayed. And if you can design a neighborhood that promotes that sense of community, it's not so intimate, in where I live, or where I have lived, but it is sort of where I stayed in Falls Church. I mean, it's a sense of community within sort of the larger city, as opposed to those who are, within arm's reach of my home. But that benefit, I find that to be, tremendously valuable, and one of the reasons I don't want to leave Falls Church, to have that constructed in a way with that design and with that in mind, and then to see people come and sort of recognize that this is something that they didn't understand. Again, it must be really, really wonderful and rewarding.
I just tell them they're going to live longer and be happier.
Yeah, well, that's a good
Right.
selling point. That's a good pitch. Yeah, I think that the Planning Commission did understand a lot of these things, as you mentioned, sort of referencing this was a contentious issue for that neighborhood, and I'm glad to see that what looks like, a year or two into the process, that the more positive aspects have come forth, and a lot of the issues that people were concerned about have not come to fruition.
I'm also pleased to see that much as my community is, the Crosden community I live in is 19 homes, and it's not nearly as embedded or walkable as the cottages. But what we find is that you have people who realize and appreciate what the community means to them in a very one-to-one next-door neighbor sort of thing, but they don't stop there, and that this neighborhood then turned around and outreach to everyone around them, and is already very focused. They have their little email list, and they've, who's going to get on what, commission, and how are we going to be engaged. I mean, they're really looking forward to that. So it's not just a little insular, which is sort of what I talk about with the Love Boat. You've got a CCRC, and people get this little, they visited the island, but they didn't really get off and spend any time. And so I think this is also good to have that right size, somewhere between, 9 and 19, in that range, means that they're still going to be connected. They're not so insular that they don't become part of the overall web of community in Falls Church.
Yeah, well, they'll certainly be also thrilled of when the Founders Row opens up. I mean, talk about access to walkable access to many of the things that they'll be looking for. And I think you made this point earlier, that the age-restricted portion was important for a variety of reasons, and one of them is that these are people who, generally speaking, are looking for some community, and this is not the type of clientele who are going to ruin the neighborhood and bring the kind of concerns that people were voicing a couple years ago.
I think it's also interesting to think that empty nesters come in a lot of ages, and all of that is defined as people who would really appreciate community. I am not advocating for changing the ordinance to not being age restricted, but it's interesting just to see it at the total other opposite of ages. You see this in the WeWork variations. They have these communal living spaces where people, even at that age, are realizing that this is something that is really important and critical for them. So it's an interesting convergence sort of coming from both ends. The very youngest of our empty nesters, if you will, and our more senior empty nesters.
Yeah, it seems like a wonderful success. We are sort of space limited here in our city, and I'm not sure we have that many other areas where we can try
You can
to
just,
do this, but
move it a
we may have
little
other
bit.
triangles somewhere else we can find. But it feels like a real successful, and I know it's won awards for its design and been well appreciated throughout the architectural community. So it seems like a real success. I'm glad to have it in Falls Church.
Like to do it again.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your efforts.
Thank
We don't
you.
have any other questions. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the timely approval of many minutes. Some of you were not on this commission during some of these. So you can abstain. We need to call Lindy back for 3/4 of these.
I saw her at the tree lighting.
Yeah? She wanna voice her approval of these minutes?
No, she
Debbie?
said to me, "Hope you have fun at your meeting," and laughed. So she seemed happy not to have to come here.
Oh, she enjoyed it more than anybody. Come on.
I know.
She's just saying that.
Yeah, I think she didn't realize how much fun freedom could be.
Well, perhaps. So, I don't know if anybody has any comments on these. Let me just generally ask, should we just go through these one at a time quickly, or do we have, I was just going to say voice vote on each one unless there are issues that people remember and don't have a problem. I did not. So, if anybody have any issues, we could go to that one specifically.
Just want to make sure I was at all these meetings.
Yeah, for the meetings I was at, they all looked good to me. There's a couple of meetings that I was not at.
Okay, well, let me open them all up. Are you gonna open them up, each one, so we can just see the attendees and get the,
Yeah, my computer just ran out of power. I forgot to write the cords, so I can't see them anymore. But
all right, well,
it's okay.
let's start with the March 18th, 2019 minutes. I called that one to order. Who's here?
I think the only correction I have is I was not in attendance, so I'm not listed there in attendance or not. So you could make the one change, and then I will abstain.
Oh, it's good, there's the roll call, got it, okay. All right, can I get a motion to pass the March 18th, 2019 minutes? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any
Abstain.
abstentions?
Abstain.
2 abstentions. Okay, let's go to the next one. Need time to mark down who's abstaining? Are you getting it? All right. You need time or don't need time? You're okay. Okay. Once again, on April 1st, I called the meeting to order, and then Ms. Teets, you were absent.
I was, so I abstain again.
Okay. Can I get a voice vote for approval of the April 1st, 2019 minutes? Aye.
Aye.
With 2 abstentions. Corey, you're going to abstain, I think, on every one but the last one, right? Okay. 2 abstentions. Now let's move on to the April 15th. Nobody wanted to be here that evening. All those in favor of approving these minutes, say aye.
Council chambers?
What's that?
The chambers open in April?
No, I think we opened up in June, is what I recalled. So,
That happened somewhere else.
yeah, that is a good edit. I don't know where it happened, but
You
yeah.
remember where you were?
I mean, it was either one or two places, but I don't remember where we were on April
It's either
15th.
MEH or school board, but, yeah.
Right. I don't know where it was.
I was in Virginia Beach.
I think you could look at the video and tell where we are.
Where I was.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in Florida, I think.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Rest is
Aye.
abstain.
Dang.
We have 4 abstentions.
Abstentions.
This barely passes.
I
It doesn't
know.
even pass, but I think since Lindy's not on it, I think it,
It passes.
all right. It's passing. We're accepting it. May 6th, 2019. Yeah,
Packed house.
I think, again, we were not in council chamber. I believe that was June is when that happened. So on May 20th, we were all here. All those in favor, say aye.
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 1 abstention.
It's almost like, why have her abstain at all?
Yeah. Trying to hog the limelight here. All focus on Corey. All right, on June 3rd, we were in the school board conference room, apparently. Anybody who's approving these minutes, say aye. Aye.
Stay.
2 abstentions. All right, and then the November 4th, we're doing this in real time, and I will be abstaining. All those in favor of approving these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
And 2 abstentions.
Mr. Chair, is there any recognition for perfect attendance on these meetings?
I would like to
over.
recognize
Year's not over.
Mr. Stevens for his perfect attendance. Well
For the
done.
meetings that we're approving.
I couldn't help it. I had to go to Finland and Guatemala for work. And he kept keeping Norway.
Yeah, Denmark. I was in Denmark. It's been a rough couple. What's the difference? It's Europe.
They know. they're
Trying to get some turnout to our next meeting.
This is a protest vote. All right, let's move on to the item 7A, Planning Commissioners reports. We have any reports? Where's Lindy? No, I'm
Well, the
kidding.
tree lighting, or the not tree lighting, the holiday lighting went really well tonight. So they added another block, if you haven't noticed. So we have towards the west, there's one more block that's lit up with the trees, with lights and stuff.
Is
That's
that
cool.
in front of Harris Teeter then? or-
Yeah, kind of in front of Harris Teeter and West End.
Okay.
Yeah, so it looks really good. Anyway, and so they just kind of lit up more trees, and they lit up some trees in the little park itself.
Any other reports? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I attended last week the joint meeting of the Urban Forestry Council, and my role is the liaison to that group in the city council. And their discussion topic was trying to preserve more mature trees in the city. So they kind of went through the usual effort, which is kind of a tug of war between property rights and Dillon rule versus the city's interest in trying to preserve more trees, but not having a lot of authority to do it. About the only thing that came out that might be a little different is that the VPIS, the Village Preservation Improvement Society, is proposing, or will propose fairly soon, and the mayor kind of expressed some interest in this concept of the city, out of the stormwater fee, allocating some money to VPIS to oversee the planting of additional trees on private property. So through a program similar to the Rain Smart program, where people would apply through a grant process.
But that puts you, what, 80, 100 years out from mature trees?
Yeah.
We're thinking ahead.
I've always said.
We're planners.
You know, they have that specimen tree thing, but there's no incentive to do it other than at the goodness of your heart. But if you gave somebody some credit, some stormwater credit, some money, maybe more people would designate specimen trees. I don't know.
That's a good point, because they are good for stormwater retention.
Oh, yeah.
Or any kind of value at all. 'Cause,
I
you
think
know,
if people thought they
problem
could
is
break
you
off their
tear down your
taxes,
house,
they
you cut
would
down
do
all
it.
trees, because
There was some discussion of possibly giving some credits for mature trees. Right now, you can get a credit on your stormwater fee for planting some new trees, but there's nothing there for mature trees. So that was raised, maybe it'll come up.
Or what
at some-
about using stormwater money to help people maintain their existing mature trees, like trim them or whatever?
Probably, I think what needs to happen, without getting too far off track here, is it's been 10 years, or maybe not quite 10 years, but maybe 8 years since the stormwater credit regime was set up, and there was a citizens task force to help develop that. That really needs to be looked at again, since that was the first shot out of the gate. And, you know, obviously, we've had some experience since then, so including some thoughts and concepts like that.
I just think the key to preserving mature trees is create an incentive. So until you do that, it's probably not going to happen.
And mature individuals doing it.
Good luck with that.
That's it.
Okay, anybody else planning commission reports? All right, let's move on to correspondence, which I don't believe we got any, correct? No. All right, the director's report. Jana, I think you're up on this. You're stepping in for Paul.
So just wanted to quickly summarize a couple items from the director's report. First off, the city manager's office, they regularly report on the capital improvement program project status. And so a quarterly report was presented to council on November 18th. And so that is included as attachment 1 as part of the director's report. There's also an update on the council's work plan. The council has a 2-year work plan, which consists of 35 work plan items. And so an update on that is included in attachment 2. And then for the Planning Commission's work plan, as we're closing out this calendar year, it's a good time to take a look at the progress that the Planning Commission has made, and then begin thinking about what the Planning Commission would like to achieve in the 2020 calendar year. And so the 2019 year has been a very busy year for the Planning Commission, and a successful year of a number of initiatives have been moved forward, including the demographics and housing chapters that were updated back in August, the natural resources chapter, which is wrapping up and should be coming to a close in the beginning of 2020. There's, of course, the West Falls Church, a special exception entitlement that was approved back in July, Phase 1A and 1B of the high school site plan that were approved, and then also the scooter policy that was adopted for the pilot program last month. And then finally, the last item for the director's report is a service survey. This was something that staff had done last year, but looking for feedback on several items, the staff reports and package materials, how the meetings have been running, as well as work products that staff has been working with the commission on. And so we'll send out a reminder about this, but the staff is looking for those surveys to be completed by December 20th in order to have some time to consolidate the results and get them in the package to be shared at the January 6th organizational meeting.
Terrific. It has been a very active year. All right, I was going to ask what the due date was on those surveys, so now I got my answer. Any questions?
Yeah, could you remind us where we're supposed to send the surveys, or what's the format?
You can send them over to Ms. Bazemore, and then she'll collect them.
Just like an attachment to an email, that's, okay.
Yep, that works.
Any other questions?
I have a high-level question that you probably can't answer now, but are we ever going to get an update on the library construction budget situation?
I believe that they've requested the GMP for that, so I think they're working through it.
That's
I
due
don't
any
know
day.
the exact
But like,
timeline
are we ever going to get
right
to talk
now.
about it, or we'll just read about it in the news press? I don't know, it's just a big CIP item. We had a referendum and everything, and just the rumors I hear don't sound good, but we've not heard any anyway, maybe Paul can bring an official update at our next meeting?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the work session items. We have two fairly comprehensive ones. First is the West End Small Area Plan. We are 9 minutes behind schedule. Doing good.
Okay, so before I move into the presentation, I just wanted to highlight a few items from the staff report. First, the Planning Commission is requested to review and provide feedback on the two draft chapters of the Small Area Plan. There's the Introduction and Background chapter and then the Concept chapter. And then specifically looking for guidance and input on the questions that are summarized in lines 8 through 13 of the staff report. Are the draft vision statement and goals compelling and responsive to community needs? Do the proposed concepts accurately reflect the city's priorities for the West End? And are there additional elements that should be considered in the concepts chapter? Just a little bit of background. The city's comprehensive plan identifies several planning opportunity areas within the city. And since 2011, the city's been working on small area plans for each of those identified planning opportunity areas with the North Washington Street, South Washington Street, Downtown, and West Broad Street small area plans that have been developed and adopted to date. And so then this small area plan effort is going to be an opportunity to report out on what's already been planned and entitled for POA number 8, which is the schools-related parcels, and then discuss how that will connect to future investment and redevelopment in the West End planning opportunity area and the Gordon Road Triangle. In terms of schedule, staff held a stakeholder meeting back in June of this year. A community meeting was held on October 26. There's the work session tonight. Another work session planned with City Council for next Monday evening. And then from there, staff is working towards a May 2020 adoption. And so that's a correction in the staff report that should be saying 2020. So we'll be moving into that calendar year soon. And so now going into the presentation.
Cancel.
Just press OK. Okay. Just a quick overview on the format of this presentation. First, starting out with a little bit of background on what small area planning is, then a quick overview of existing conditions and existing guidance, existing city policies and past planning studies for the area, and then talking about some opportunities for future improvements. And that corresponds to the concepts chapter that was in your Planning Commission package. So what is small area planning? Well, it's a long-range plan that looks at a smaller section of the city, and it provides an opportunity to do a more in-depth study of an area and to identify tailored solutions and strategies. And so the small area planning process, it's intended to provide an area-specific framework for redevelopment of an area that would then be consistent with the guidelines set forth in the city's comprehensive plan. The city has identified planning opportunity areas in its comprehensive plan. And so these areas generally consist of the city's commercial areas along North Washington Street and Broad Street. And these are areas that are maybe currently underutilized and are thus recommended for additional development or redevelopment. This map here shows the city's plan for planning and identifies those 8 planning opportunity areas. And so as I mentioned, this small area planning effort is going to be for the city's west end and will cover POA number 8, 4, and 7. It'll provide an opportunity to report out on what's already been planned and entitled for the schools-related parcels, and then talk about how that relates to the West End and Gordon Road Triangle POAs. As I mentioned with the schedule, there was the stakeholder meeting held in June of this year. This included staff from adjacent jurisdictions, relevant agencies, and some of the landowners. Staff has been reviewing existing studies and existing conditions since that time to begin drafting the chapter. There's the community meeting back in October, and then staff is working towards that May 2020 adoption. So now talking about existing conditions for this area. Here's an overview of the study area. It's bounded to the north by I-66 and to the south by the W&OD Trail. POA number 8 is the schools-related parcels, and that currently consists of Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School and the George Mason High School. But of course, that area is experiencing significant changes already with the new 7-story high school that is under construction and the coming West Falls Church mixed-use development project that got its entitlements back in July. Across Haycock Road from the schools-related parcels is the Falls Plaza Shopping Center, which is in the West End POA, and that shopping center has the Giant and the CVS and the Staples as some of its main tenants. And then across the street from there, in the Gordon Road Triangle, that's an area that includes the city's property yard and a mix of light industrial uses. And so what's unique about this area compared to some other areas of the city is that there are already large areas that are under single ownership. In addition, redevelopment in the schools-related parcels with the 9.5-acre mixed-use development project, it's beginning to spur revitalization in the surrounding areas. Just north of the site in Fairfax County is an area of land owned by Virginia Tech, and then another area of land that's owned by WMATA. And so these two landowners have submitted a joint application for a comprehensive plan amendment, and they're looking to do a mixed-use development project in the future that would then connect to the project that's in the city. And then across Haycock Road from the 9.5-acre site, there's almost this same acreage available under single ownership, shown in red, that's owned by Federal Realty. So that provides another opportunity for coordinated redevelopment. And then across the street from there, there's two main landowners, one of which being the city. So there could be opportunities in the future to further consolidate land in that area. This shows an overview of the city's 9.5-acre site and the general concept for how that would connect to the Virginia Tech site and the WMATA site as that redevelops in the future. So the idea here is to have the commons area in the project in the city connecting on up through the Virginia Tech site and then leading up towards the metro. So what is West Falls Church like now? Well, the existing area has large block lengths, which make it very difficult to cross from one side of the street to the other, as shown here as someone trying to cross West Broad Street.
That must have been taken like on a Sunday morning, like at 6 a.m. Right.
The areas also consist of large seas of parking, making it difficult to access the retail and other destinations in anything other than a car. The Gordon Road Triangle consists of light industrial uses, not much in the way of streetscape or other amenities, so this certainly isn't a place that right now people would want to go visit and spend time in. There's also a lot of school foot traffic in this area, being next to the city's middle school and high school, and so this is an area where the city certainly should be looking to prioritize safer bike and pedestrian connections. The area is also located within close proximity to a metro, which could be a real asset to this area. However, the way it's currently laid out, it's difficult to access that metro stop in anything other than a car. So currently, it's an asset that's somewhat underutilized. And then finally, there's the opportunity to build upon the gateway. There certainly is a sense of arrival as one is entering the City of Falls Church along West Broad Street. And so that's something that should be expanded and enhanced as future investment is made in this area of the city. So now looking at some of the existing guidance, the city's comprehensive plan sets forth some general design guidelines and goals for each of the planning opportunity areas. And so these are consolidated and summarized here for all three of the POAs, but they look at incorporating high-quality urban design, enhancing multimodal connections and accessibility, creating a retail frontage along West Broad Street, and then encouraging lot consolidation specifically in the Gordon Road Triangle. There's been a lot of work done over the years, about a decade's worth of planning for this area of the city. And so this chart here shows all of the past studies that have been done recently, as well as some of the various actions. So one of the key takeaways here is that there's been a good pace of studying the areas prior to moving forward with actions. So now talking about some of the opportunities for improvements in the area, and this corresponds to the concepts chapter that was in the Planning Commission package. And so that section starts off with a vision and goals for the area. And so the vision statement is shown here. And so I'll go ahead and read that off. But the vision for the West End that's proposed right now is that the West End is a vibrant gateway into the City of Falls Church. Residents and visitors are immersed in a welcoming, connected community that embraces the city's heritage. Building upon activity already underway, investment supports the area's economic vitality, enhances safety and walkability, and affirms the city's commitment as an urban sustainability leader. And so this is an item that staff will be looking for feedback on from the Planning Commission tonight. Seeing if this hits the right set of priorities. Are there other things that the city should be considering? There are then 5 component goals that drop out of that vision statement. I'm not going to read these all off, but they focus on establishing a new downtown area, an area that will support the city economically and improve community quality of life, encouraging quality urban design, throughout the area, instilling a sense of place, enhancing transportation connections and accessibility, particularly not just making sure that it's a highly connective area, but making sure that it's safe for people to get around and switch from one mode to another. Ensuring that utility and infrastructure planning meets the current and future needs of the area while also considering innovative solutions. And then finally, looking at having publicly accessible parks and open space areas, not just areas that are set aside as courtyards for tenants of a building. And so then the remainder of the presentation is going to touch on the concepts that support that vision and goals. First, the West End downtown. The idea here is to create a vibrant destination as part of the city's West End, something that will build upon the city's existing heritage, consider and respond to local and regional needs, incorporate a variety of amenities and uses, and then includes flexible spaces that can be used for programmed community events. Urban design, of course, is going to be critical as the city's looking to rebrand its West End. And so there are a variety of elements that can be incorporated, looking to incorporate elements that will create those urban experiences, things that people interact with on a daily basis. And so they include a variety of things such as wide sidewalks and attractive streetscape that encourage walkability throughout the area, places to stop and sit, areas for outdoor seating to eat a meal or perhaps have a cup of coffee, places to gather, and flexible spaces for community events. And so first step in enhancing the urban design of the area and creating an environment for those urban experiences is to create a pedestrian-scaled urban framework. And so there are a number of elements that go into that, one of which is creating smaller, more walkable block sizes, reducing building setbacks, and enhancing connectivity throughout the site. Continuing on the topic of mobility and accessibility, walkability can be promoted throughout these areas by enhancing connectivity between the three planning opportunity areas, also looking to draw upon regional assets like the Metro and the W&OD Trail, and then also considering how this section of the city connects to the rest of the city. And so in terms of existing conditions, West Broad Street and Haycock Road are acting more as barriers to the area rather than bridges between the POAs. And the area as a whole is not very inviting to pedestrians. In fact, an Urban Land Institute study that was done scored the area as a 40 out of 100 in terms of walkability, and that score is indicative that most errands would require a car in this area of the city. So that's something that can be improved upon in the future as additional investment is done in this section of the city, and improvements include having wider sidewalks, fewer curb cuts, adding planted medians, and engaging streetscape to make walking more enjoyable, reducing building setbacks to make it easier for pedestrians to access the destinations in this area, and then adding interior block paths as well. So again, the idea here is to create a new street grid in this section of the city to break up those larger blocks, have better connections to the W&OD and the Metro, and to bring buildings up closer to the sidewalks and make them more accessible. And then when talking about future development in this area of the city, it's also important to set aside space early on in the planning process for parks and open space areas. Currently, the city's west end does not have much in the way of parks and open space areas. Really, there's just the West End Park that's currently there. And so as this area redevelops, there are opportunities to incorporate different forms of parks and gathering spaces. The new commons area that will be built as part of the West Falls Church project provides an opportunity to have a new urban green space area. And so there are other opportunities to add plazas and squares, maybe something similar to the Mr. Brown's Park that was just added as part of the downtown area, in order to incorporate gathering spaces in this section of the city. So a few precedent examples shown here. So looking to create spaces that are flexible and adaptable throughout the year, like the Pentagon Row shown on the right of this slide, which includes spaces that can be enjoyed during the warmer months of the year, but then also has spaces that can be transformed and used in winter months with the ice skating rink. There's also the Commons area in the bottom left of this slide, which shows how food and drink areas can be incorporated into a gathering space to create a place that is inviting, brings people in to sit, spend some time, and explore the area. And then also King Street in Old Town Alexandria, an example of how a street can actually be a gathering space if it has a good urban design, streetscape, and landscaping that make it a good place that people feel safe walking around in and spending time socializing. And then finally, the last section is on utilities and the natural environment, importing community building blocks. And so this section of the concepts chapter touches on a number of elements, but for the purposes of time, I'm just going to quickly talk about urban trees and stormwater. Urban trees have many benefits. They enhance the area's aesthetics, provide comfort and shade for pedestrians. They also have environmental benefits as they absorb stormwater and improve air quality. And so this area currently has somewhat sparse tree canopy coverage. Curb cuts interrupt a lot of the street trees. And so as this area redevelops in the future, looking for opportunities to enhance street tree coverage throughout the area. And then finally, for stormwater, the graphic on the right side of the slide shows that the city's west end is largely covered by impervious surfaces. So as this area redevelops in the future, this provides an opportunity to improve the stormwater situation, looking to incorporate green infrastructure, rain gardens and green roofs, and other facilities that can help to slow down and absorb stormwater runoff. And so with that, I want to open it up to discussion. And those questions that were highlighted in the staff report on lines 8 through 13 are shown here. But looking for the Planning Commission's feedback on the draft vision statement and goals, looking for the Planning Commission's priorities for the West End, and then responses to the concepts section, and if there are any other additional elements that staff should be considering.
All right, thank you very much. Those are big, broad questions. Any comments related to these three or on anything else?
A question for, where's the concepts section?
It's on page 2.
In the staff report, is there a line number?
It's on page 19.
It's in the presentation, it's in the draft.
Plan.
Yeah,
It's in the draft. I have a big picture comment. The idea that this is a new downtown, I have some concerns about that. I think that most cities, have one downtown. You may have multiple centers and nodes and multiple, activity areas. But if we're going to make this into a neighborhood, it already is a neighborhood. But if we're going to try to put in some kind of focus on it, maybe it needs its own identity. Maybe it's West End. Maybe it's Uptown. I don't know. We already have a downtown. And I don't think we want to say we need a new downtown. We already have a downtown that we pay a lot of attention to, and it's also a priority. But this is something different than that. So I think it's important to draw that distinction.
I agree with you, too, because I doodled several different things. And I said maybe an active urban center instead of downtown, or just a center of activity, or a town center, but not a downtown.
I agree. I wrote the same thing.
Right. Even Manhattan, even New York City only has one downtown.
Come on, Andy.
I did too, right?
It says new downtown, question mark.
Right.
The Council of Governments refers to these as activity centers.
Right, that could be fine. I think because downtown implies, the central business district, the core of the city. Even New York City only has one downtown, for better or for worse. But, so, I don't know if we could have two downtowns, but we should call it something else. I think that gives it identity. Maybe it's West End is already what we've been calling it, I guess, for decades, but.
Fine name.
Well, and the thing that really makes it unique is TOD, right? Transportation Oriented Development, right there by the metro station. It's the only place in the
That's not that
city.
catchy, though.
No, original, that's right.
I'm sorry.
And there's a whole goal related to transportation. I don't think that's the problem. I think it just should be like an active urban center, or like you were saying, activity
Center.
or urban activity center, something like that.
Or the West End.
Or the West End. Well, but I think in the goal, they're trying to give it a label.
Uptown, yeah. Uptown is.
Yeah.
We could have an uptown. It is up, geographically, elevation-wise.
West Town.
Okay, and so then Founders Road's Midtown?
Sure.
All right, we all jumped on board with that. Anything else, Brent? Way to go.
all right.
Nice one.
I think the vision's fine. It seems broad and I think kind of vague, to be honest. We just talked about a lot of specific things here. I don't know how general you intended it to be, but it doesn't seem to be that specific. The gateway part, I think, is kind of specific to this place. The rest of it feels kind of plain vanilla to me. The only question or concern I have is this part about embracing the city's heritage. I think it sends the wrong message for the site. It is something we want to do something very different with. as you've already laid out. I think that sends the wrong message that this is something that's kind of the same, when I think we should be looking for something different. So, and for the goals, again, I don't know how specific these are supposed to be. We don't have housing in there anywhere. As a goal, we have a lot of specific things, but nothing about affordable housing. We talk about it all the time. I think it would be good to lay that out up front. You talked about the dearth of street trees. That's not in there. So I don't know if, I'm not sure how specific you want these to be, but I feel like there's a lot that we've already talked about that could be in these goals, and to make these less generic than they are now. They're fine for what they are, but it could be anywhere.
Those are good comments. Anyone else?
I just wanted to support the comment about the lack of housing. That's just something that it seems like it's missing from this chapter. And in the vision, I was just going back and looking at the vision that we had in the housing chapter, and I think the word inclusive could be added here, inclusive, welcoming, maybe even diverse community. Yeah, I like that we have urban sustainability leader. I think, so I see in terms of goals, I think housing is missing, and I'd like to see a goal there too. I think when we talk about goal number 4, I think it was, if you could flip to it. Ensure utility and infrastructure planning meets current and future demands of the city's residents. The future demands sounds right to me, but I think what's also missing here is any kind of notion of climate resilience. And I know we're covering that in the next discussion topic, but I think explicitly, while incorporating innovative, sustainable solutions shouldn't be an afterthought, that should be fully integrated into how we design and build this neighborhood. So climate resilient and sustainable, elevating that to top priority.
Terrific. Anybody else? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, also picking up on the 4th goal, it strikes me that, I'm not sure we've done this in the past, but we talk about meeting the demands of the city's residents in terms of sizing of infrastructure, but what about planning so that the tax yield, the financial side of this is such that it will pay for those, that the taxes from this area will pay for the infrastructure costs going out over time, so that it doesn't become a burden to other residents of the city. So that's a thought. Then the other couple of thoughts I had, one is on page 112 of the actual draft. Are we going there now, or?
We're going to go there in just a second. I think we're going to handle the big 3 questions, and then we'll let.
That's the only comment I have on the larger goal then.
Any other comments on those 3 big questions, or the goals, visions, goals, and there was one more, I forget what big question was.
I think it's a good point about the financial aspect of it. I mean, for me, a main purpose of these area plans is to set the stage, so if a developer wants to come in and do something, they've got a leg up on what we're likely to go for. So like housing's a good example. I mean, in some ways, like this is a commercial land, like we don't necessarily want there to be a bunch of housing there. But history shows that the way to get development is to have some mixed use in there. And so giving some guidance on what that mixture should be and what the financial impact of all of this should be, I think is key to that, at least if that's one of the points of having these small area plans, is to make redevelopment more streamlined. And then I had some other smaller things that I think are not big picture goal stuff.
Well, one of the 3 questions was on the concepts chapter. So I think we addressed the visions and the goals pretty well. But moving into that's much more of the specifics. Is that where your comments were, Mr. Stevens, in terms of the concepts?
Well, mine was kind of to number 4 up on the goals.
Number 4. You and sustainability, it'd be great if you cared about that issue.
Yes, I do. That's where I was going on page 112, where it talks about sustainability, and that middle bullet says, environmental sustainability involving net zero, district energy, geothermal systems, and LEED Gold certification. Those are all still, good concepts. The district energy was kind of popular about 5 years ago, but I think after Arlington threw tons of money at it and high-powered consultants and number of meetings and so forth, they kind of decided that, at least in Virginia for right now, that's just not a viable concept. What that seems to be being replaced with is this concept of net zero ready, which is construction so that you build a building that's very tight, very efficient, will save the tenants a lot of money because of low utility bills. And at the discretion of the owner, you can put on a renewable energy system and make it net zero. So net zero ready is kind of its own concept. And given that we have the high school, which is going to be one of those buildings, it makes a lot of sense to mirror what they've done at George Mason and the rest of this planning area. So that's one comment I had. And then likewise in the second chapter, it's 2-8, there's also a reference to district energy and suggests we might want to reconsider including that concept on a going forward basis in our planning documents.
I think that's a good point. Hopefully, things in Virginia will be changing. We'll see. In terms of concept, also, I think when we're talking about transportation and stuff, having some sort of concept of rideshare support, which eventually could then support autonomous vehicles, which people still laugh at me about. And then also, we mentioned bike share, but
laughing?
do we talk much about actual bike access and designing for bikes and then scooters as well? Seems like that's the future to some extent.
So this concept section is going to lead into the rest of the plan so that we will get into some more of those details.
Got it.
But we can highlight it generally in this section.
Yeah, so I think just on the concepts piece, big picture, again, I really like that we are combining areas 4, 7, and 8. I think that makes a lot of sense to look at this from a more holistic perspective than just the way we had it laid out originally. So that's, again, big picture concept. In terms of the actual concepts, I thought they're very aspirational, sort of listed all the things we'd love to do. It does give it gives a developer a lot of options and says we're open to all these different concepts. As we get into more details, I think that's really where it's more important because right now, based on this, if I were to try to develop in Falls Church just based on these concepts, I would not sure I have any more guidance other than we're open to everything and we want to do the best possible city we can. So that's sort of a comment as we get into the details, but it did feel really aspirational. Some of the ideas I thought were going to be complicated as it related mostly to that Gordon Road triangle. I think that the school-related parcels and the one where Federal Realty is right now, the name just escaping me, or POA 7, those things really seem doable and where we could really make a lot of these impacts in terms of how this is laid out and adding the trees and more housing and more walkable kind of space. But I'm not really sure I have a vision from the concepts about how we're handling this industrial area. If in fact we are, as a city, trying to get rid of light industrial, period, and it's not something that really belongs in this small 2.2 square miles, or if this is something that we really do still need to protect because it's provides places for our public works to have space, and this is an important part of the city.
Concrete factory.
Yeah, concrete factory.
Right.
That's in Fairfax County, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. It's implied, I guess, in this is that we're saying that, right, we don't want those uses here, but, I mean, is that what we're trying to say explicitly? I mean, the sheet metal place and it's I mean, we don't really have a lot of industrial zone land in the city at all. We have a little pocket here, so we saying we don't want that, right? Are we saying that that's, although in one of the concepts, I think it shows, kind of still had purple in that area, like, where you show that grid, where was that? There was
I think the issue with Gordon Row from the past studies that were done, especially one of Virginia Tech ones, was that the problem isn't that we don't want that light industrial, it's just that it is one of the closer areas to a metro station.
Right.
Within that 10-minute walk, a good piece of it. And that's why we're concerned, because if the light industrial were somewhere more in the middle of the city and not within the zone of walking to the metro. But I kind of feel like Uber and, the scooters and all these things that are coming kind of make that less of an issue, because it's not as hard to get to a metro station once we have the scooters in place. But that's really what it's about.
Well, it speaks to the history. I mean, I think, actually, I was going to, this is more of a small comment, but I know even the history section of this in the draft, I think, needs some work. It's a little bit all over the place. I think actually looking at why this area did develop the way it did, clearly, the railroad was probably part of it, maybe most of the reason why it developed as an industrial area, but maybe we should look at that. I don't know if we have, I know there are folks in the city, our history commission, others that may be able to provide more insight. As it's worded here, it's kind of strange to me. There's like a strange sentence, which I don't know anything about, but maybe there's something about it, but it sounds like someone hits the wrong note on the piano. It's like the land, it talks about the school site. There was one single room schoolhouse in 1857. It burned down, it remained vacant, and was then retroceded to Fairfax County in 1890 as part of a segregationist measure. Yeah, that was. We wanted to expand. It's kind of like and then we kind of leave that alone. Then we move on to, and then the town incorporated in 1948. So.
What happened in those?
What happened in those? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the segregation. I don't know. I don't know what that was about. But if we're going to throw that in there, either we should. Is that important to?
No, explain what the heck that means.
Or is that important to the history of this area? Is that to this neighborhood? Is that important? Is that I don't know. It was kind of all over from the history perspective. It just didn't read right, and the heading was called Town of Falls Church. I don't know why that's the heading of that section, because I just don't understand that, because then it wasn't even a town until 1875. I don't know.
Well, maybe it was the wrong side of the track, so that's where all the industry was.
So we gave the land back as part of a segregationist. I don't know. What was the segregationist measure that we? Do you guys know what that is? Am I the only one in the dark here? I know I've heard rumors about things about the town's boundaries over the years.
Well, it's down by the Tinner Hill area.
No, this is over at the school site.
I know, but
So why we gave vacant land back to Fairfax in 1890 as part of a segregationist measure? I don't know what that even is. So maybe you guys do. So if it's important, then let's expand on it and explain it as part of the history of this area and fill in the other gaps in time as it became industrial. But you know what I'm saying? Otherwise, it just. I don't know, someone reading it is like, what? It's like.
That's what I actually said when I read it.
Yeah.
So. Well, kind of the history didn't seem like that part didn't help us at all. And
no.
As we move forward.
Right, the history should inform sort of where the area has been and why, and then speak to, okay, well, this is where it's been and why. Yeah. And why maybe it hasn't, it's not where the plan wants it to be. And then you move on to the other parts to talk about how you're going to get it there. So. From that perspective, I think we need to kind of build the framework and the foundation of why we're looking at this area a little bit more than we have so far.
Hey, I just wanted to. Annie said something that made me think a lot, and because most of the stuff I was concerned about, like we don't mention affordable housing, we don't even mention different modes of housing, which really should be mentioned in there. That we want different sizes, different pricing. Not just affordable, but we need different levels of housing. And we don't really talk about that at all. And then the tree thing was, I also agree with that. Like number 5 could easily talk about needing more street trees, needing more trees inside properties. But what Annie said is right. We don't really talk about commercial much at all. And there's a couple of ways we should be talking about. One, we want vibrant retail that has people, part of the reason people do come out and walk. So I think that should be in the goals, because as you know, people read what they feel like reading, and I think they're more likely to read the goals and actually go through the whole document. And so I think it really should talk about some private retail. We also aren't talking about office, and there's a lot to be said about office in terms of this. One, if you don't have office, you don't really have a daytime group of people that can eat and buy and stuff. You don't have any daytime vibrancy. And you also don't have the ability to work and live in one place. So, like, you know, one of the things that's nice about West End is there'll be 2 office buildings along with all the housing, so people have an option that they possibly could live and work there. And so I just think that it's kind of not good for us not to mention these 2 things, that we do want retail and we do want commercial to support that retail during the day and also to allow people to live and work in one place.
Can I just ask a question about that? Because I was, as a newbie, sort of confused about where the details come in, because it is very high level and sounds great, yeah, but what do you actually do with it? And I think there was a line in there somewhere that gave me a little more confidence about what we were looking for, that specifically said, work, live, play. It's actually in there somewhere.
Yeah, and I did
Possibly even
see
a goal,
that.
but it was, I didn't know, maybe,
It's on page 2-2.
2-2.
The last sentence under creating a vibrant destination builds on that point.
Right, and I saw that, and I think that makes sense, but I think that I'm really, you guys know how people look at documents. I think the things that are most important have to be in these goals. And there are a lot of extra words in here, you know, that don't really need to be in here. I mean, we kind of repeat ourselves. I think, like, you know, I mean, there was a point about a couple of other sentences that I think that we need to be really clear on the most important things being in the goals, even if we have to take out some of the happy language that's in here.
Did you finish?
It was just like a follow-on question, like, how do we bring the specificity to life? I mean, so that's the next, this is conceptual, and the next step is...
So this will be the concepts chapter, and then the idea is then to have a chapter that builds upon each of these 5 concepts, whether it's 5, whether we add more, or eliminate some. So that's when we'll get into more of those details.
I was also just sort of looking back at what we did for the West Broad Street one. And I know you haven't worked on the land use section for this yet, but even on that one, in the concept section, we had some maps that kind of laid out potential types of developments. This was the whole node-based thing. So I didn't know, I guess we have a couple of sort of mappy-like things in our conceptual thing here, but I don't know. I guess we don't really. And I don't know if that was a good idea on the...
I don't remember the maps. I mean, I'm looking over your shoulder, but I don't remember what they were talking about.
And then the land use has a lot more maps with zoning and stuff like that, but I just, again, for me, I'm thinking, I'm a developer, I'm gonna go read that area plan and then figure out what I should propose to build. I don't know if we should be more specific about, I mean, we have like one,
Well,
where'd it go? The
you know,
one-
yeah, you know, the
this-
mo-
Like, we have that one,
Right.
page 2-7. But would it make sense to put together more conceptual layouts of the area? Or is that too prescriptive?
I don't know, maybe, I mean, it can be building heights, I mean, maybe it should be, right,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that prescriptive, but it could provide, you know,
Or is that something we would do in the land use chapter?
So I think that's something that staff was looking to do in the actual chapter itself.
Okay.
Have this chapter just be the high level, this is what we're looking for, and then those
That makes sense.
details
That
in the
sounds
actual chapter.
right, okay, right.
Sounds good. I had here's a minor question. The little map in the top corner has 4 and 7 yellow, and whatever the other one is, 8 isn't. Is there a reason for that? Since it also says planning area opportunity areas 4, 7, and 8. I didn't know what the yellow meant.
No, I think that was just an error
Okay.
that I did not catch in the template. We'll fix that.
And then, this isn't, I don't know that it shows me here, but in your presentation, you mentioned a few places about reducing building setbacks, and I know what you mean is, let's not have big parking lots in front of it, but you know, we have to be careful how we say that, because there's certain places, even that on the page where you were talking about, there's a picture of a sidewalk pretty close to the building. So I think we want good building setbacks, but not, we want pedestrian level building setbacks, not car level building setbacks. So maybe be careful about how we talk about that. Also, does anyone know why it's Gordon's Road in Fairfax County and Gordon Road in Falls Church? It's very weird.
Another topic for the history section.
You go around that bend and it's
It was a
suddenly
result of
Gordon's Road.
segregationist
Maybe it's all
movement.
about grammar.
In a segregationist measure,
no
we dropped the
apostrophe.
S.
I know, I know.
Gordon.
The S was dropped.
I don't know, it's weird.
Gordon or Gordons, yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, I've noticed that. Right,
It's weird. It's right in the bend, which is where it goes into Fairfax County.
right.
Any other comments we have?
Just a question, you know, we're required to change our comprehensive plan every 5 years, or at least some portion of it. Is there any requirement as far as changing these small area plans? So once they become finished, they can stay that way for a long time, is that right?
Forever.
Forever.
I think by the time we finish them all, then we're gonna have to start over and review them.
But there's no plan to do that, so they could just,
That's up to us.
No,
We
they
make
they
it
live
a goal.
on until they either get implemented or, you know, they become out of date, and in which case people ignore them. So, but
Yeah.
ideally, we would have something that would have a timeline that, you know, laid out for when it should be implemented. I mean, there is I'm looking at the table of contents. I mean, typically, there's like implementation. Chapter 7 would hopefully, or would tell us that. So, and hopefully we would hit that.
I think also as the commission, we can just say that when we finish them, we could look at them and say, do we need to start reviewing them? The review will be quicker than the initial report, but I think we do have to review them at some point.
Yeah, I would go a step further and say, once we're finished them, we should pass some sort of recommendation that says these are updated on
The timeline, yeah.
every 10 years or something like that, or maybe more, maybe in line with the comprehensive plan or something like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I think they will become somewhat out of date. I mean, even in this concepts, it talks about all the great things that are happening in the school-related parcels and the it'll happen by the time we practically finish this section.
Well, this one's nice because most of the other ones we've done
West
don't
End.
get done until the major development in that area is well underway. And so this one's similar, although we have big chunks that have no planned development, so.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a bit of a
POA
challenge.
8 is going to basically, we're writing it to
Yeah,
what
that's
we're
done,
doing.
right.
And that one's in really good
Right, which is how
position.
like the previous ones were, like when Harris Teeter was getting basically built, we were planning that area. When we were approving Founder's Row, we were planning that area. So it's nice to be a little bit out in front on this.
We started out with
At least
a
two-thirds
plan
of it.
where we would have been out front, but
I know, we switched
we
it up.
didn't get them done fast enough.
But we sort of are out in front of it. I think that.
This one, yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2/3 of it we're out in front of, but that
But
one
it
third.
will, because of the new development that's happening that we know about already,
Yeah.
I think people are going to be very interested in those
Yeah,
other two.
totally. That's why this is
7 and 8.
good
Or seven-
timing, I
4 and
think.
7, rather.
It does seem like those other two have more likelihood of redeveloping now that the high school site is happening.
Well, and they redid the McDonald's facade, so it's
This is still
quite a nice.
McDonald's?
Yeah.
Gotta buy some light bulbs up there.
But now you can go in and use a screen to order.
Uh-huh.
So it's the beginning of the new
I think
economy.
that's spawning the
Always wanted to do
redevelopment,
it.
actually. I feel like we've given you a lot of input for at least just the goals and concepts piece. And we need a lot more information on the segregation measure. So, other than that, I don't
had-
think we have any other comments.
Well, my last comment was on the vision. Where did that go? So, blah, 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 blah. When we say building upon activity already underway, investment supports the area's economic vitality. Are we talking about our investment? What investments are we talking about?
Both public investment and private investment that's underway with the West Falls Church.
Yeah, I know the
project.
underway part. So I guess that's what you're talking about, the investment that's,
So both public and private investment. So it could include investment as far as making transportation improvements. That could be done as part of the city's investment into the area.
right, so we're referring to the investment that's already being made. I wasn't sure if we meant like okay, that's already happening, now we need to go invest over here. But what you're saying is the investment that's already being made and what's happening could spur on the stuff over here. Additional investment by different people. All right. I think vision statements are hard.
They are.
So.
Okay, great. Staff okay with our guidance? You looking for more?
I think that's good for now.
I did like the map of Savannah.
All right, we're going to move on to the last item on our agenda, the 8B, the National Resources Comprehensive Plan. This is the Tim and Corey show coming up. So you're going to give us a presentation, and then I'm sure we'll have lots of comments.
It's okay, I'll spare you the presentation. And I think you should say it's the Melissa, Tim, and Corey show. So I'm Kate Walker, I'm the city's environmental programs coordinator.
Sorry, Melissa. Let me rephrase that. It's the Melissa, Tim, Corey show.
But everybody.
And everybody can provide input.
But we're all forward.
My joke fell flat. It's sorry.
We're the alumni over here. We're starting to take over the commission.
I hate the environment. I'll push you back.
We only have one EDA and one BPA.
All right, you may continue. I apologize.
Thank you. Since I was last here in September, basically what we've been working on is incorporating comments. A few more were collected from boards and commissions. We did an online survey, not a whole lot of responses to that, but we did have some very important responses, I think, that helped shape the chapter. The biggest changes that I've made have been in the climate, air, and energy section. One was adding the word energy. I think it was someone on the library board who said, well, where's energy in all this? And I said, it's in climate and air, of course. But that seemed like a good move. And then also the section about our interaction with other governments. So the city is part of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. It's part of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. We participate in the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is actually an international organization because we have a Canadian and a Mexican. And these are all organizations that really expand the city's capacity to act. If we, Falls Church pushing for legislative change alone isn't going to have much impact, but Falls Church pushing with other Virginia jurisdictions has a lot more power. And these organizations also help us to do things. So the Urban Sustainability Directors Network has a special Virginia group that discusses especially energy management issues. So it's a process that goes both ways. We contribute to these groups. These groups really help the city have more of an impact and also help to enable us to make the changes we want to see within our own environment. And that section was all in the introduction to the chapter. So it's now moved into the section on community. So with community then being defined as both the small community in which we live and also the larger community in which we participate. There was some, all the changes are listed, a minor change in the vision statement. It had said something about using the latest building techniques to achieve environmental change, and I made that using all possible means to achieve beneficial environmental impacts, because I thought might be good to specify that we want them to be beneficial. That's sort of a sketch of the changes. I think we can just go straight into questions and comments if you have any.
All right, great. Let me look over to this side. Any comments or questions? And now onto this side.
You want to go first? Or?
Go ahead.
Mr. Stevens.
Okay, a few comments and
Page
then,
one.
a couple of questions. No, I don't have too many. This looks a lot different than the previous chapter, and I think it's important to point out that it does, and there's a good reason for it. And that's since 2005, we've learned a lot, and the whole area of environmental knowledge has just changed dramatically. So it's not surprising that this looks a lot different. In fact, it would be very strange if it didn't look a lot different. So I think your approach has been to add a lot of things as time has gone on. There are probably far too many things here than could ever be done, but I think on the whole that's a good thing to show people that there's just a ton of things that could be done. If the resources were there, obviously that's not going to happen. We're going to have to pick and choose and figure out which ones are going to give us the most value. So those are just kind of some higher level comments. I did have a few questions on the smaller things on the draft itself. So the first one is on page 12. I don't know if you have access to.
Got it right here.
Okay. So on the section that talks about the green power on page 12.
Yes.
It talks about offsetting grid electricity. I'm just wondering if you mean emissions right there rather than the actual electricity.
Oh, yes, okay, sorry.
Minor point, and I can give you a list of these later. So on page 13, the first.
You now have to do draft 41. I'm sorry.
Right.
It happened.
No surprises.
Page 13 on the first strategy, I think it might help there to add some examples of what we're talking about. Those are kind of general things there. For example, designing for net zero ready, and we talked about that a little bit on the West area plan. Otherwise, some of these environmental terms get so vague that people sometimes may have a hard time just knowing what it means, but maybe a few examples might make that a little bit more concrete.
Mm-hmm.
Question on page 23 where we talk about recycling. Do we have a place for recycling glass right now? I kind of get the impression from this that it looked like we did, but
No, we don't.
we don't.
It's one of the things that we need to address, and in fact, on the ESC's legislative submission that went to Cindy Mester to take to the legislature, finding a solution to glass recycling is one of the big issues. I went to a Council of Governments meeting where they were talking about glass recycling, and there's a guy who has a plant in North Carolina who would take all the glass from Northern Virginia. He'd be happy to take it, but that means transporting it by road all the way to North Carolina. So we don't have a viable solution here.
Yeah, this just said the city also has a recycling center where residents and businesses can drop off separated metal, glass, plastics, and cardboard. And I saw that. Oh, do we?
Oh, well, maybe it's a punctuation issue because it should be separated metal, glass, plastics, cardboard, and paper, and use textiles. So it's a punctuation issue. Yeah.
But is there a
You
place?
don't separate the glass, plastics, cardboard, and paper.
I didn't think there was any place over there to
Yeah.
leave glass.
Plastics, it can go in the same bin as the plastics as a recycling bin.
Oh, okay. Well, that's no news.
But it's not a good idea.
No.
We're trying to find locations to put the purple bins and supply the glass to Fairfax, but there's some issues with arranging a deal with Fairfax that they will take our glass if we collect it separately. And issues, of course, with the cost of picking that up. I mean, ideally, we would all have curbside pickup and...
Wait, so we shouldn't be putting our glass in the bin? Is that what you're telling us?
Well, right now, I think it's probably best to put it in the trash because that's where it's going to go.
I know Fairfax has basically said to people, like, they don't want to, have people unlearn it. So they've basically said, yeah, we can't recycle it, so put it in there anyway, and we'll crush it up, and whatever they do with it. But
Arlington went that.
But the
through
city,
that.
I thought our.
The city hasn't resolved this issue yet.
Still will.
We are trying to get a separate drop-off location for glass. It's unlikely that we'll be able to afford a curbside pickup for glass.
So what happens with the glass now? So I have a glass in my recycle bin, which I've been doing for the last 8 years. Well,
It goes to the MRF and it gets put in the trash.
so it just gets sorted out. So
Yes.
I can just put
I
it.
just do it up front.
Right.
One of
was
the
actually-
questions I've asked of Fairfax is what will be the impact on the incinerator of a sudden large increase in the amount of glass going into an incinerator. Glass is not all that burnable.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I actually was talking to the guy who runs recycling in Arlington. He lives in the City of Falls Church, and he was saying Arlington has that problem. The reason why they stopped taking it is because they truck it down to wherever, and it burns a lot more, carbon to move it and then have it recycled. But they they have somebody you can drop it off, and then I think they take it to Fairfax County, and they crush it, and they use it for,
Basically, Fairfax County has
road
a
stuff.
pilot plant for this glass crushing, but the gravel that it produces is not approved for DOT use, so Fairfax has been using it for some paving and fill around pipes, but if in the City of Falls Church, we often are relying on federal funding for many of our projects, and you can't use non-DOT approved materials in a federally funded project, so it's
Get it
actually,
approved, come on. How hard could that be?
it takes time.
On page 31, let's see, it's item 4, the CPACE, the proposed policy action. Just to clarify there, that CPACE can also be used to fund stormwater. That was
Okay.
added.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah, so was just added this last General Assembly, so that's a good thing to add. And then on page 34, just the last one of these.
You know, the city website still says glass should be set out at the curb with your recyclables?
That is correct.
Right.
Yeah.
That is the current program,
So, all right. So I should continue to put it in my recycle bin?
yes.
All right. For a second, I thought I've been doing the wrong thing for 8 years. All right.
Anyway, number 17 says install renewable energy generation storage facilities on city buildings and schools. That's got a long-term timeframe. And which is probably accurate in terms of all the buildings in the city with one big exception, and that's the high school, which could be considering a solar system in as short as 2 years. So I was just wondering if it'd be helpful to put an exception there, except for George Mason High School, in that, just so that they wouldn't misinterpret this to say, oh, well, the city's telling us, this is a long-term thing.
One of the things, of course, is that these priorities are
Plastic.
shot in the dark. No, they are carefully considered priorities that can change. And I don't think, there's nothing about it saying long-term here that excludes it being done in the short term. In fact, it explicitly says that in the implementation section, that
Yeah.
if the opportunity arises, do it now.
What's the asterisk stand for?
Those are the COG 100%.
Oh, yes, 100% energy goals.
The Council of Governments puts together, with the help of all the jurisdiction, a long list of things that they could be doing to improve their climate readiness. And some of them are suggesting that maybe only half the jurisdictions do it because of various issues. Some states are Dillon Rule, other things. And others are 100% for all of the jurisdictions. And I think these asterisks apply to ones that are all
I see it
jurisdictions.
now.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't
I think
see
it appears just before the
it is-
table.
Yes, it's a footnote number 12. I had missed it. All right, thank you.
So on the whole, I think, this is ready for prime time. There's some things I personally would write a little differently here and there, but such as including climate change in the vision, but just to pick one at random. But putting that aside, I think it's quite remarkable. I'm glad we took the extra time to add all of these different items, and hopefully City Council will find something worthwhile here, and as well as the city as a whole.
Thank you. I would ask if you have specifically, have you looked at the appendix on page 45? I had added a section on renewable energy resources in the city. I would really appreciate your input on that. So you go past all these goals and things. I put back in Appendix B you had seen in May and then not seen since, and I added a section on renewable energy sources.
Yeah, I did see that. It's fine. It's not meant to be profound or
No.
in-depth in detail or anything. So I think it just maybe whets the appetite and encourages people to read more.
I just wanted to point out that it exists as a natural resource.
All right, thank you. Who's next? Lauren?
I'll just make it short and sweet, which is I just want to support what Tim just said, that this chapter is a significant advancement on the last chapter. We have learned a lot. This sets our sights high, as it should. We've learned a lot, and we're going to continue learning a lot as we start to implement some of these strategies. So I think it's time to approve this and start implementing it. I'd like to see some of these short-term strategies and some of the medium and longer-term ones start to happen. One very minor wordsmithing change, minor in letters, but I think major in intent in the resolution, if it's possible, on line 273. Line 273 says, I've lost it. I think it says these are strategies that could be implemented, and I'd like to switch the could to should. If I may be so bold.
What line did you just mention to?
273.
So if you look at the staff report, rather than looking in the version in the back of the chapter, you can see.
In the draft resolution that's in the staff report.
It's the last whereas.
I found it. Great. All right. Melissa, you have any comments you want to make?
Not really. I mean, I thought this was a vast improvement over the older version and some of the earlier drafts. And there's just so much great stuff in it, and I wish we could get to all of it. And I think that's the thing. It's overwhelming because as time goes on, we have resource issues. We're going to have to decide which ones to really move forward and which ones we can't. I wish we could do all of it. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right. Well, I don't have anything to add to what these fine commissioners have told you. I've read it, and I've seen you highlighted and read all the changes you made, which is really, really helpful. Focused my attention on the alterations, and was able to cross-reference that with a lot of the notes that were also provided as part of the attachments. So it looks like a really comprehensive addition of all those notes, and I think it really speaks to you listening to the community and to the people who have taken the time to really give their input. And it's clear that input got into the actual chapter as it currently exists. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
After 40 and maybe 41 drafts, we're just about there.
I think it's very important to say it wasn't just me. This is a combined effort of the staff, especially the planning department and the Department of Public Works have had considerable impact on this chapter, and I got some great guidance from the planning department on how to present it to you.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was quick. It said on the agenda that it was going to be 30 minutes. I think we did that, and we are right on time, so thank you. Any other comments before we adjourn this evening? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned.